Welcome back to Data Talks. This is a very special edition. It's with an African leader, so a good friend of mine, Bitange Ndemo. I've known him for more than 15 years when he was then permanent secretary in Kenya. We'll talk a bit about his career and his transformative impact on Kenya at that time. Currently, Bitange Ndemo connects from Brussels, where he is the ambassador of Kenya to the EU, the European Commission, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Welcome, Bitange.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
And Bitange Ndemo is also a prolific writer. I think you have a few million also followers on Twitter, which is now called X. So yeah, tell us a bit about yourself, also how you got into the policy domain, into innovation, but also into becoming really a prolific writer and a force of reason for the continent.
Thank you. And I think everything keeps on happening by accident because my background was in academia at the University of Nairobi, where I started. But I did work in the US when I started in the US, University of Minnesota, for my undergraduate, and I did my master's there. And I started working for a company called Medtronic. It's a healthcare company. I worked for a few years and then I decided that I would come home. I will go back to Kenya. So I went back to Kenya. I couldn't quite find a job in the new area that I had covered, which was management information systems. A lot of banks, a lot of organizations had not started using ICTs. So I ended up getting a job at the University of Nairobi as to teach a course they called accounting systems. And the university demanded that I do a PhD. That's how I went to University of Sheffield in England to do my PhD. Then I went back to University of Nairobi, continued to teach until the government picked me up in 2005 to be permanent secretary, the Ministry of Information and Communication, which was basically responsible for ICTs, telcos, and postal services. That's how I got into that space. I don't know whether I need to continue discussing my career as a permanent secretary.
We'll come to that in a minute, but this is actually the time I think we met. That was when I also relocated to Kenya in the mid-late 2000s. And Ndemo, what I remember, what obviously is associated with your tenure, and obviously you were, you're already still one of the hardest working people I know. We always had meetings at 6 a.m. in the morning or in the late evenings. And a few things were happening when you were permanent secretary. It was the time when M-Pesa started, mobile money.
Yes.
Who don't know Kenya, it is the time when the undersea cables entered Kenya and when internet actually arrived in full scale on the continent and in East Africa, and also when we worked very closely together on open data. Tell us a bit about these big transformations and that you were part of.
Thank you. At the Ministry of Communication, when I went there, it was basically one of those ministries nobody wants to work in because we had an incumbent Telecom Kenya, which was struggling because the infrastructure was falling apart. It had more than 20,000 employees. This is because it was a parastatal owned by the government and abused by politicians, in the sense that every politician who came to head the ministry hired relatives, and we had more employees than the company needed. It needed to be restructured. They had started a mobile wing, which was called Safaricom, a very tiny company, but because it was owned by government and abused by politicians, we sought to delink Safaricom from Telkom Kenya and then clean up Telkom Kenya. If I can give you one simple example, I went to check. I just wanted to go around and see what they did, and we went into a room where they were connecting phones and stuff. I had not known there's something called the gray market. The gray market was much bigger than the normal market for Telkom Kenya. And we decided with my minister then that this thing needs to be privatized and delink the mobile from the mother company and see how we can make this efficient. Uh, that's a huge task because um, it was held captive, what we call state capture, uh, by politicians. Nonetheless, we tried. But more important at the time was I came from the university, and at the time we used to pay for 1 meg uh, capacity broadband. We used to pay about 3,000 US dollars, 1 megabyte. And I knew the pain we went through for this. And I decided then that the first thing we work on is infrastructure and also make the telcos much more efficient by implementing uh, a regulatory mechanism to get more players into the market and see how we can reduce the cost. If you look at the amount of money people paid to call the US or England, it used to be like $12 per minute. It was very expensive, and because of that, there were people found it easier to pay through the gray market, which was run actually by some of the employees. So there was a huge task ahead of us to start solving. Luckily, um, everybody was tired of this, and the mobile was beginning to grow. Uh, a handset at the time would cost about 2 to 3 thousand dollars, meaning it was mostly the elite who had the mobile handset, and we said, okay, there are too many problems. Let us begin with infrastructure and the implement the regulatory mechanism, bring in more players, and see whether we can lower the cost of telecommunications. Um, we had support from the president. We easily delinked Safaricom, but because we were new, also we didn't know that there were other aspects that we need to sort out. These are the gateways. So Telkom Kenya allowed Safaricom to be delinked, but they held captive the gateways, meaning that uh, even Safaricom cannot operate if it can't operate fully as an independent company. That was chaotic because we couldn't easily liberalize the gateway. Uh, Even we were threatened with death. But eventually we liberalized the gateway. Safaricom got it. There was another player which had come into the market. So we gave them their gateways. We began to see the prices come down, but still the cost of broadband was very high. And because we relied mostly on the World Bank for advice, I remember trying to explain that we needed the undersea cable. There was some initiative going on, which was called Easy. Um, World Bank, rightfully, they wanted that cable to serve 22 countries because at the time the entire Africa was using 1 gig of broadband. And the argument was that if you brought 3.6 terabytes of capacity, nobody would use it. My argument was that if we brought it, it would actually be swallowed and we can move forward. Uh, Unfortunately, they didn't believe so. And because of that, um, and the other process was too slow, we decided to break off and tried to build the cable by ourselves, which everybody laughed and said nobody can do it. We went to the Middle East. The president gave us a letter to see the Emir of UAE. We eventually agreed that we are going to build the cable from UAE to Mombasa in Kenya. I came back. I talked to Michael Joseph, who was CEO now of Safaricom, that they needed to invest in the cable. There were other players, and quickly we raised enough money to lay the cable. This is something people didn't think could happen. And within 2 years, we laid the cable from Fujairah to Mombasa. There were many problems in between. Those I can write in a book. Uh, Problems like anti-corruption did not believe a cable can be laid in water for 5,000 kilometers. So almost every week they were on my case saying that we were paying money to some funny companies. It's not going to work. Even when it landed in Mombasa, they didn't believe it until we assured them the cost of making calls would come down. And indeed, it came down per minute for a mobile call dropped from $1 to about three, 10 cents, and later uh, 3 cents of a dollar. That's when people believed that some such a thing can happen. Um, we got the infrastructure in place. Then the prices came down. People began to use. People began to believe that the changes we're making were proper. Uh, but at the same time, we wanted the amount of data that government collects. We collect huge amounts of data, especially this is through annual data on consumption, production, healthcare. All this data, we were looking at it and saying, this can be a source of several innovations. And we sought to digitize it and provide it to the citizens. So we created something, Kenya Open Data Initiative. The country director allowed me uh, to use some of the World Bank staff to do the data entry, which the president opened, and a number of applications were developed. One key one I was explaining is the one in healthcare, where we enabled the policymakers to see on a daily basis what was happening on the ground, which was very good. But this did not stay for too long. After I left, they said, "Oh, this is government data. It shouldn't," because some of the taxes, some of the revenue collected by government, which we call appropriation in aid, came from such reports of government. So Ministry of Planning said, "Oh, we can't give it to you for free," without knowing that it created more money when, when, when you give it out.
In demo, as they say, the rest is history. And fast forward, more than a decade later, you got appointed to be the Kenyan ambassador. So tell us how you felt when you got the appointment, and also tell us how life is as an ambassador, and what was as expected and what was a bit different.
It's actually a very different animal from everything that I've done, from academia to policy, because in academia it's very easy. It's it, the, the, the rule of the thumb in diplomacy is not to offend anyone. That's what I was told. Don't even even when facts are not true. By the way, um, in academia, it's rigorous debate, and then you agree on something. But here in diplomacy, there are several areas where I disagree. Sometimes I speak before my fellow those whom every meeting I go as a diplomat, I'm accompanied by some officer. They start stepping on my foot that I'm getting out of line, which disrupts me anyway. That, but I'm getting used to it. Um, One must always consider that the the perspectives and sensitivities of multiple stakeholders, often prioritizing relationship. Diplomacy is, as I said, is a very different ball game from what I've done in academia and in policy, uh, because in it, the rule of the thumb is not to offend anyone when facts um, are very, even when facts are very clear. Um, uh, Unlike academia, where there is a lot of debate and then you agree to disagree, in policy, of course, also where decisions are carefully made using data, uh, diplomacy isn't like that. It requires a lot of understanding that you don't want to annoy anybody when you are working as a diplomat, but somehow you get to pass your message without offending the other person, hoping that they would understand. There is no blunt honesty in diplomacy. Um, so the success means uh, by the ability to foster cooperation and maintain positive ties. That is the goal, and that is what we focus on. Something frequently a more nuanced approach to communicating even the most evident truths. So it is very difficult than for those who grew up from other spaces. So you get to learn how to say things that you don't want to say the way you say them.
Yes. I know you'd like to return to Kenya, but I hope you have good memories of being an ambassador in Europe and in Brussels.
Yes.
Yeah. Demo, let's switch to some of what we have been discussing and working on. Obviously, you're also associated with the founding of World Data Lab, with whom we harassed myself. But you write a lot about Africa and the digital transformation. In fact, I just came back from Nairobi to launch the Africa Youth Employment Outlook report, which you also helped to initiate. So, just in terms of Africa's role in the digital transformation, do you see Africa left behind and being an adopter of technology at best, or can it actually also race ahead and leapfrog, as some say, as the example of mobile money and M-Pesa have shown?
Well, as mobile money, actually, it's not just Safaricom's M-Pesa, but across Africa, there are companies we have a couple of unicorns now in Africa. I saw you wrote that not one that has grown very big, but we have quite a number of unicorns like Flutterwave from Nigeria, OPay, which are doing very well. M-Pesa has done very, very well. They are doing well, and several other multiple startups have not been able to do well because sometimes they sell them at a very early stage before they show promise, and that's one of the problems that we have. Nonetheless, I would say Africa has done generally well, Today I was listening to Jeffrey Sachs, and his thesis says the future is in Asia and Africa. So I was carefully trying to listen uh, what supports his argument, and it's the same argument you've been advancing about the population, in the sense that in another 50 years, I think 80% of the global population will be Africa and Asia, and that he made such predictions a few years back. I think he said 30 years ago, and he felt so bad afterwards that he was wrong. But it turned out that he was right, that China is ahead of US in all aspects, coming from a very desolate state where nobody would have thought that by this time China would be where it is. India is beginning to dominate, meaning that there is some correlation between birth rate. And, I used to disagree with you on this. That let I wrote something and you told me in demo no, um, uh, and he said it very well. I think I'll send you the link to see that the narrative that Africa is going to rise and join Asia, for example. Some of the issues that we are dealing here in diplomacy is that Europe has an opportunity in Africa with respect to competitive manufacturing. Places like Kenya, um, in fact, I'm seeing people at Intibat to think about shifting some of their production to some of African countries where the capacities significant enough to help in terms of competitiveness. So there is some future for Africa, but we need to build infrastructure with number one, for example, the infrastructure around emerging tech, AI, data centers, and stuff, because digitization is what is growing the economy of Kenya. Nobody thought that this would be one of the leading sectors that drives the economy, but it has led to greater productivity improvement. We are beginning to see a lot of young people getting into this space. And a lot of work that was done, for example, from OpenAI, those who were teaching the machines was actually being done in Kenya. I came out defending OpenAI because people thought they were saying, oh, they are paid peanuts, whatnot, and stuff. Uh, but you don't just get the pay, you get capacity development. And from that, we can now begin to look at how they can be supported, be able to come up with their local innovations. We are behind a little bit in terms of developing local LLMs. These are local languages, which African unique languages, because some of what we have found, especially from the Global Learning Council, is that if you teach in vernacular, the comprehension levels are much, much higher. From the Global Learning Council, which is looking at the role of digitization and the future of learning, is that AI is going to truly impact learning, because AI can actually tell you are not understanding or you are not comprehending. Right now, as teachers, you assume they understood or they will understand at some point. And with this role of AI, we are going to see much greater numbers of young people getting the right education for competitiveness in the days to come. Yeah.
Brilliant demo. So, if I synthesize, basically, Africa is now a strong adopter of technology. Um,
Yes.
it's not necessarily an inventor, but it could become, as it has proven, but also as China has proven, right? There's a phase of, and the World Bank recently called it in the World Development Report. First, you need to invest, then you need to infuse the technology, and then you innovate. And I guess that's a bit similar textbook that you just outlined.
Yes.
Excellent demo. You just mentioned a bit AI, and I know again you write about it. You write about how this can transform agriculture, healthcare, many other sectors, especially education. What do you see for the continent in the next 10 years, and how will AI reshape the opportunities?
We must confront AI. I mean, what I've told you about the global learning uh, center is that uh, AI can enable us to fast track or to reduce uh, the gap between where we should be and where we are at the moment. Because I am involved in this, and I've been talking or writing about developing value chains, leveraging data to do that. For example, everybody is asking me, "What are you going to do?" And my response is that I want to go and develop the language that people can understand, how they can become competitive. Simply, what I'm saying is that if we provided chatbots to farmers, you've been with the World Bank. Africa did very well when we were talking about Africa Rising, when we paid the assistants who helped farmers to grow their crops and became very productive. This assistant can now be done on the mobile handset, meaning that Africa must quickly develop the ICT infrastructure across the country and be able to leverage AI to provide constant information to the farmer that what you are doing, this is the value chain. The narratives that AI is going the, to, to, to disrupt the way education is delivered, it's going to be in a positive way. Here is what I was telling the university that it would actually remove so many of the problems we have around universities, around schools, around exam taking, um, meaning that uh, you there is something we call in teaching Bloom's taxonomy in terms of testing people. AI probably will do the best, and that was taken care of in that space, meaning that it's not the exact answer you need. It is the thought process of how you get to the answer, and that's where AI excels better than us human beings, especially when we are grading students. Meaning that if you are very good, you have understood the concept, you should be able to explain. It is not the right answer that matters. It is the thought process
Mm,
on that issue, how you get to the answer. And I think one of the first things I promised University of Nairobi is to change the way exam is done, and you do it when you are comfortable, because it's not going to be the same thing every student is doing. It is just to explain the concept from your perspective and see how much you have understood that concept.
mm,
So AI is going to make it much simpler. We must confront AI
mhm,
and other emerging tech, uh, which would enable us to leapfrog, by the way,
mm,
and be able to do things in a much more
mm,
different way than we have done.
yeah. Well put, Ambassador Bitange Ndemo. If you just, to take a broader perspective on the future, say the next decade, which everybody says is the time of AGI, artificial general intelligence, that will, the time probably of driverless cars and a lot of things that we're all waiting for and excited about. Again, if you position again Africa and Kenya specifically, what do you think? Where is the continent now? Where are African countries? Remember when we left, I left Kenya 12 years ago, and it was on the move, and it some things got better, some things are not about the same still. How do you see Africa and Kenya specifically compared to its peers and competitors? And I know now you have the global perspective out of Brussels. How do you see how far has the continent gone, and what will can we expect for the next decade?
I think the next decade, what has improved in Africa is that the people, especially the young people, are more vocal than it has ever been before. And they need to remain vocal in the sense that as soon as Africa eliminates what you call state capture, where they give preferences to some of companies, and which brings in different types of corruption, um, this would change. And these young people are leveraging technology, and the big tech has actually seen that these young people, you train them, they deliver. Like I talked about OpenAI, a lot of the works that you see was done by kids from Kenya, mostly, by the way. And because of this, we need to get the leaders to recognize that the world has come a small space. We must take advantage of this uh, to be able to improve productivity, get jobs to young people, create an environment where they are able to create local stories, local content, and stuff like that. That's where the jobs would come from. But and also productivity in whatever in farming, then healthcare, also improve on healthcare and stuff. Africa can actually leapfrog. The only problem that we've had is that the economies must begin to think broadly, respond to the pressure that they are getting from the young people, because older people don't do it very easily. With that, we would see a new Africa shorter in a shorter period than we have ever thought about.
Ambassador Bitange Ndemo, thank you so much for these reflections. This podcast has a traditional ending, which is the favorite number of my guests. So, uh, Professor Bitange Ndemo, tell us about your favorite number and the story behind that number.
Yes, my favorite number is seven because it has many religious connotations that I find very interesting. Across various faiths, the number seven often symbolizes completeness and spiritual perfection, such as the 7 days of creation in Christianity, the seven heavens in Islam, and the frequent appearances of the number in rituals and teachings. These recurring references make the number seven feel both universally significant and personally meaningful to me, inspiring reflection and curiosity about the deeper connections between numbers and human belief systems. I
Bitange
finished.
Ndemo, my friend and ambassador and professor, this was a very profound response to something that has, often some different trajectories of this favorite number.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being on the show. Wish you all the best for your relocation to Kenya and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.